We are often told to not take Donald Trump seriously when it comes to his authoritarian and fascist-like tendencies, but when you've got 40 out of the 44 handpicked cabinet members that will not be supporting you in the 2024 election, I think we should pay attention to those people. But if you end up getting anything out of this video, please remember to smash that subscribe button. I'm trying to make it to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and I would very much appreciate your support. Now, I also think that there's been quite a bit of hesitation to use the word like fascist. For one, I think people don't want to hyperbolize. I also think that people are afraid to admit that maybe we could have a fascist dictator come to the United States. We saw how things went in Germany. They elected a fascist leader in, and then he did what he could to assume as much power as possible. So I think there is some hesitation to use words like fascist or make direct comparisons to Hitler. But when you've got so many people that have worked close with you that will not support you and say that you are unfit to be president, I think the story changes a little bit. I think the calculation should change. We all remember when Mark Milley gave his farewell address after retirement, and he warned that we don't take an oath to a dictator or a wannabe dictator. Do you guys remember this?
We don't take an oath to a country. We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator, and we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die to protect it.
Mark Milley was the top general in the Trump administration. He was hand-selected by Donald Trump. And he came out and is saying Donald Trump is dangerous. He is one of the most dangerous people in this country. And if we're going to take anybody's opinion seriously, shouldn't it be somebody like Mark Milley, who served under Donald Trump, who got a front row seat to Donald Trump's authoritarian tendencies? That's where I'd place my money at. So whether you want to believe something like fascism could come to the United States, I think we should believe the people that were closest to Trump and are sounding the alarm bells. Let's go ahead and take a look at this reporting about Mark Milley calling Donald Trump fascist to the core. This is pretty damning stuff.
There's one person on this year's ballot who's been called fascist to the core by their top general, Donald Trump. The Independent reports, quote, that in Bob Woodward's forthcoming book, War, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said to Woodward, quote, he is the most dangerous person ever. I had suspicions when I talked to you about his mental decline and so forth, but now I realize he's a total fascist. He's now the most dangerous person to this country, he said, a fascist to the core.
That is a pretty damning indictment from Donald Trump's top general. Mark Milley was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which means he was the highest-ranking, most senior military officer to serve in the Trump administration. And when you have somebody like that coming out and sounding the alarm bells, I think we should stand up and listen. In no other world would it be okay for you to be trying to hire somebody and you call that person's reference, and they say, oh, they're late all the time. They got in fights at work and didn't get along with anybody. We caught them stealing from the register. There's no way you would hire that person. Why should that be any different from now? Why would we go to hire Donald Trump again when we know he is a danger to this country? And somebody like Lee McGowan went on CNN, and she put it in really clear and concise terms and listed the number of threats that Donald Trump poses and how these behaviors are, in fact, fascist. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
General Mark Milley is a professional. He knows exactly what he's saying. And as you said, it's not like he's particularly candid with the press. This is the guy that stood beside Donald Trump when Donald Trump was like, can't we just shoot the protesters? And he was like, no. He's like, can't we just shoot them in the knees? And he was like, no. And they ended up putting tear gas on them and they went and did the Bible photo. When we think about fascism, we have to remember that there are so many signs that are actually happening. There's weaponized nationalism. There's scapegoating of minority groups. There's mythology of a better time back in the day when we were great. There is obviously the cult of the leader. There's the weaponization of the Justice Department, the cutting down of the free press, right? And now he's talking about locking up political enemies. He's talking about rounding up people and putting them in camps. These are all fascist behaviors. And the sooner we stop pretending that that isn't a word that could come to America, the better off we are, because this is a real fear that people should have. And if someone like General Mark Milley tells us that this is a real thing, then we need to listen.
Now, Lee McGowan did an excellent job on this CNN panel. She goes by PoliticsGirl online. You should definitely check out her work. But she did a very good job of listing off the different fascist tendencies that Donald Trump has. He does want to go after his political opponents, and we know that he tried to do that in the past. I just did a piece a couple weeks ago where we looked at 12 separate instances of Donald Trump trying to weaponize the Justice Department to go after his perceived enemies. We also know that he is very hostile to the press and attacks them on a daily basis. And there's definitely the cult of personality. He nationalizes, or he weaponizes nationalism. And then, of course, he demonizes immigrants like we have never seen before in the United States. These are all fascist tendencies. And when people closest to Trump are coming out and saying that he is dangerous, we should definitely listen. But unfortunately, there are people out there like Coleman Hughs who says, you know, well, he didn't do anything in his first term, which is a lie. So there's nothing that we need to worry about for a second Donald Trump term. Let's go ahead and listen to Coleman Hughs try to make that argument.
He's a populist. He's a populist with some very troubling anti-democratic tendencies, but he is not Hitler. He's not Mussolini.
He's talking about good genes and bad genes at this point.
If he were a fascist, he had the opportunity of a lifetime to show us that during COVID by declaring an emergency and doing whatever he wanted, and he didn't do that.
That was when he was still surrounded by people like General Mark Milley. He was still surrounded by people who could hold back his worst interests. The second version of Trump will not have any of those people.
I think you're right.
He will be absolutely surrounded by people that will say, sure, yes, let's shoot the protesters.
You could even hear Coleman Hughs there admitting that a second Trump term will be worse, but he is not willing to not vote for him? I mean, how does that make any sense? We wouldn't allow a drunk driver to crash into the guardrails, spin out, whatever, and then throw him back the keys and say, oh, let's try again. We know that a second term would be much different because Donald Trump won't have people like Bill Barr. He won't have people like Mike Pence or Mark Milley who stopped him from carrying out his worst instincts. A second Trump term is going to be filled with Trump acolytes. So when he has these terrible ideas and he wants to carry out these attacks on his political enemies or things of that nature, those people aren't going to stand in his way. They're either going to agree with him and say, hell yeah, let's go after Democrats for the sake of going after him, or they're going to turn their head and look away and let him carry it out anyway. And that is a crazy proposition. We know that the guardrails will be severely diminished in a second Donald Trump term. That's why it's so important that we listen to the people that worked with Trump in his first administration when they tell us Donald Trump is a danger to this country, he's unfit to be president, and he does have these authoritarian tendencies that do not mesh well with the United States government. We should not be electing people like this. And Lee McGowan, again, makes that point very clear here.
He was the
to
president,
see
and
that
40 out of 45 of his cabinet members will not support him. His vice president will not support him. His generals will not support him. He was the president. He was terrible. They're saying we worked as close as we possibly could to him, and we won't hire him again. Those of us in the regular world, those of us in regular America who didn't work right next to Donald Trump, we don't know. So we have to trust the people that worked as close as possible to him. And the people who worked as close as possible to him, 80, 90% of them are saying, do not hire this man again. He is a danger.
And she is exactly right. 40 out of 44 hand-picked cabinet members that were selected by Donald Trump will not be supporting him in 2024. And there are even more that worked in the Trump administration that are warning America that we should not be voting this guy in for a second term. He is dangerous. If you're going to listen to anybody, it should be those that worked closely with Trump, those that got a front row seat to these authoritarian tendencies, because they know best. Lee McGowan is exactly right. We have to trust that the people who saw him up close and personal know what they're talking about, because we don't have the on-the-ground experience to witness these crazy Trump behaviors. But we do know that he's going out there and making threats against his perceived enemies. He's talked about throwing Liz Cheney in jail and holding public military tribunals. And it was just this past weekend where he was on with Maria Bartiromo threatening to use the U.S. military on American citizens. This is absolutely insane.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
So as you can see, he is very clearly talking about Democrats or people on the left. He's not talking about undocumented immigrants. He referenced Adam Schiff in another conversation just like this one. He is talking about going after people that do not hold his same ideology. That is a fascist tendency. That is a fascist behavior. Donald Trump has exhibited all sorts of authoritarian behaviors. So we should not look the other way and vote him in for a second term. And if we're going to listen to anybody on these matters, like I said, it needs to be the people that were closest with Trump, who will not be returning for a second Trump administration, because they know that he is a threat to this country and that a second Donald Trump term would be absolutely devastating to the United States of America. So these are the things that we need to remember when we go vote this November. I'll leave it there. If you guys got anything out of this video, please remember to smash that like button and subscribe. Maybe share it with a friend or two. I'd very much appreciate that. Like I said, I'm trying to make it to 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, and I would very much appreciate your support. If you want to take a look at another one of Donald Trump's fascist tendencies, go ahead and watch that video on the screen now of him demonizing the hell out of all immigrants. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one.